The last day of death row. Inmate, John Arthur Spenkelink. What happens when the state rushes to kill? Hi everyone. What happens when the very first person chosen to die sets off a national firestorm? On May 25, 1979, John Arthur Spenkelink was strapped into Florida's electric chair, marking the first involuntary execution in the United States since the death penalty was reinstated. But his case was more than just legal history. It was a flashpoint for protest, a symbol of a system many believed punished the poor while sparing the privileged. Spenkelink wasn't a monster by media standards. He wasn't infamous. Yet, his final 24 hours became a haunting countdown of isolation, last-minute legal chaos, emotional goodbyes, and a final quote that still echoes in death penalty debates to this day. Behind the prison walls, old Sparky waited. Outside, crowds chanted, judges debated, and the world watched. What really happened in those final hours? And did Spenkelink's death mark justice served or a warning ignored? Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind his final day. Dear friends, on May 24, 1979, the sun rose quietly over Florida State Prison, but inside its towering gray walls, history was preparing to repeat itself. John Arthur Spenkelink sat alone in his small cell, fully aware that time was slipping away. For 6 years he had fought the death sentence handed to him, and now, with all appeals exhausted, he faced the unthinkable. The electric chair, known ominously as Old Sparky, was being prepared just a few feet away, humming in silence, waiting. The air in the prison was tense. This wasn't just another execution. It was the first involuntary one in the United States since capital punishment returned in 1976, and it would make headlines across the country. Spenkelink's story began far from the spotlight. In 1972, he was sentenced to 5 years for armed robbery and sent to a minimum security camp in California. But John had no intention of serving his time quietly. He escaped, stole a car, and fled east. During his cross-country run, he met a hitchhiker named Joseph Szymankiewicz, nicknamed Joe Monkey Wicks. The two men traveled together for months, drifting from town to town, committing petty crimes and drinking heavily. But on February 3, 1973, their journey ended in violence. They checked into room 4 of the Ponce de Leon Motel in Tallahassee, Florida. The next morning, Wicks was found dead, shot twice in the back of the head as he lay in bed. Spenkelink fled, hitchhiked back to California, and was arrested within a week. At trial, Spenkelink claimed self-defense. He said Wicks had assaulted him, forced him into degrading acts, and threatened his life. He insisted the killing was not premeditated, but a desperate response to violence and manipulation. But the forensic evidence suggested otherwise. Wicks had been killed execution style. There were no signs of a struggle. Witnesses reported hearing gunshots that night. And when it came time for a verdict, the jury took just 3.5 hours. Spenkelink was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. On the morning of May 24, 1979, Spenkelink awoke to the same breakfast he'd had countless times before: scrambled eggs, toast, grits, and milk. He barely touched the tray. The food wasn't the focus anymore. That morning, his attorney, David Kendall, arrived from Washington, D.C. They met in a small room, speaking quietly, holding on to a sliver of hope that a last-minute stay might come through. Their conversation was brief but intense. Kendall and his team had been working around the clock, filing emergency appeals, arguing that Spenkelink hadn't received a fair trial. But with every minute, the odds shrank. Later that day, Spenkelink was granted 2 final visits, one from his mother, Lois, and another from his girlfriend, Carla Key. The guards, often cold and procedural, stepped back to give them a few moments of privacy. His goodbye to his mother was quiet, emotional, and final. He told her he had made peace with what was about to happen, but in his eyes, the fear still lingered. As night fell, the prison grew eerily still. Rumors swirled that the U.S. Supreme Court might intervene. Around midnight, there was a flicker of hope. Justice Thurgood Marshall issued a temporary stay, but it didn't last. By 6 a.m. on May 25th, the full court had voted 7-2 to allow the execution. The final legal barrier had collapsed, just minutes before the scheduled time. Inside the prison, Spenkelink remained quiet. He declined a priest. He refused a final meal. But in keeping with a long-standing tradition, a prison official offered him a drink of Jack Daniels. He accepted. It was a small moment of defiance, or perhaps dignity. Shortly after 10 a.m., the guards entered his cell. Their faces were stone. Their steps were practiced. They shackled his wrists and ankles and led him down the hallway. In a symbolic act of resistance, the other inmates began slamming their cell bars, creating a deafening roar that filled the corridors. It was their final farewell to one of their own. At 10:11 a.m., the blinds were drawn in the witness room. 32 people watched in silence as Spenkelink was strapped into Old Sparky. A gag was placed in his mouth. A thick black hood was pulled over his face. His heart pounded beneath the leather straps. When asked for final words, he didn't lash out or cry. Instead, he made a statement that still haunts the death penalty debate to this day. Capital punishment means those without the capital get the punishment. And then, the switch was pulled. A surge of 2,250 volts tore through his body. His back arched, his muscles contracted. A second surge followed. Then a third. At 10:18 a.m., the prison doctor checked his pulse. John Arthur Spenkelink was pronounced dead. He was 30 years old. But the controversy didn't end there. In the days that followed, disturbing rumors began to surface. Some claimed Spenkelink had been mistreated prior to execution. Others said he was already dead before being strapped into the chair. Witnesses noted the viewing window had been blocked for several moments, an unusual breach of procedure. No autopsy was performed, in violation of state law. Public outrage grew. In 1981, after mounting pressure, Spenkelink's mother had his body exhumed for an independent autopsy. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the famed Los Angeles coroner, conducted the exam. His conclusion? Spenkelink had died solely from electrocution. There were no signs of assault or foul play. The rumors, it seemed, were just that, rumors. But the questions raised by Spenkelink's execution never fully faded. His case became a rallying cry for those who believed the justice system was skewed toward those with money and power. And his final statement, a haunting indictment of inequality, remains etched into history. Spenkelink was buried in California, far from the cell where he spent his final years. But his story, one of crime, consequence, and controversy, continues to resonate decades later. Because sometimes, the most powerful truths come not from what we prove in court, but from what we fail to question before it's too late. John Arthur Spenkelink's execution wasn't just the end of one man's life. It marked the beginning of a fierce national reckoning with the death penalty. His case raised unsettling questions. Did poverty seal his fate? Was he chosen simply because the system needed a first? In his final moments, Spenkelink didn't scream or beg. He delivered a chilling truth. Those without the capital get the punishment. It was a statement that cut through the silence and continues to challenge how justice is applied in America. Though later investigations confirmed the state followed procedure, the rumors, protests, and legal chaos surrounding his death left behind a trail of doubt that still lingers. His name may have faded, but the issues his case exposed have not. Thank you for watching. If this story challenged your views, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the conversation below. Do you believe justice was served, or was John Spenkelink a casualty of a flawed system?